Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 769 for the 2nd of July, another month coming around, 2023. Richard Saunders coming to you from Sydney, Australia, cool and crisp and blue skies. Coming up on this week's show, we catch up once again with Susan Gerbic, who gives us an update on the issue we discussed a couple of weeks ago with the tick-tock quack. Maybe that should be a children's song. What do you think? The tick-tock quack, quack. I'm sure listeners will come up with an idea. Yes, the tick-tock quack, plus skeptical adventures, a skeptical outing with local skeptics, and Susan talks to a man who has encountered Bigfoot. I wonder how Bigfoot buys shoes. Maybe that could be the song. The tick-tock quack and the Bigfoot buying shoes. Anyway, coming up at the top of the show, Susan Gerbic. Always a pleasure to chat with Susan Gerbic. Following that, it's the Australian Skeptics News with Adrienne Hill, all the way from Skookum Studios in Calgary, Canada. And this week, Adrienne has yet another Canadian word of the week for us. What will this week's word be, I wonder? Then to round off the show, back to the Trove archives where we look at references to Russia, from Russia with psychics, and especially to the Tsar over 100 years ago, and the influence on a certain mystic, not Rasputin this time, on the Tsar and the Tsarina. Now, for those of you in Sydney, coming up on Thursday night, the 6th of July, at the Occidental Hotel, just near Wynyard Station, we have Skeptics in the Pub. Skeptics in the Pub. Can't wait to go along. Haven't been there for a while. And this month, the guest speaker is Annie McCubbin. And the blurb on Meetup, and I'll link to this in the show notes, so if you're in the Sydney area and you want to know more about the Australian skeptics and their adventures, and when we have things, Meetup is the place to be. This month, we will be hearing from Annie McCubbin, actor and author of the skeptical Laugh Out Loud, Why Smart Women books. We need other humans. We are reliant on them to survive, and our brains are designed to trust them. When we're being scammed, we are hard up against our intrinsic nature. We think our rational brain is in charge when, in fact, it is our unconscious emotional drivers that are calling the shots. In her latest book, Why Smart Women Buy the Lies and How Critical Thinking Reveals the Truth, Annie examines how cognitive flaws can poke their noses into different aspects of our lives and hijack our thinking and decision-making ability. Wow, this sounds like a great talk. This really does sound like an interesting night. I hope to see you there. I'll be there with lots of spoons. Oh, yes. And I think Maynard will be there too to do some interviews. A burger, a beer, a great night out with skeptics. That's this coming Thursday night at Sydney Skeptics in the Pub. All welcome. A big shout out to my friends who have recently gone to the dentist. Yes, it's a bit odd. I know. I recently went to the dentist. And the dentist said, we'll have to replace that crown. Oh dear. But it's only cosmetic, so I'm just tossing up about that. But wouldn't it be nice just to go to the dentist and have a clean-up and then the dentist say, well, yes, you're doing okay. And I think about my father in this situation because by the time he was in his mid-30s, he had to have his teeth replaced because they were in such bad condition. These were the days before fluoride. Thank you, science. Well, it's time for me to run downstairs and tripping over the cats. And those cats are rather smug this morning because I forgot to turn the electric heater off last night. No danger, of course, it's in the middle of the room. But two very happy cats spent a very toasty night last night. I'm going to run downstairs, defrost a bagel, and have a nice peanut butter bagel. Why not? While I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone.
think we need to think. Here's Susan Gerbic.
Yes, I really think we need to think, and I love to think with none other than Susan Gerbic. Hello, Susan.
Hi, Richard. Hi, Skeptic Zone listeners.
And as Susan knows, I just had to chase the cats out of the Skeptic Zone studio. We were just about to record, and I had two cats leap up and try to inspect the microphone. But that's just one of the behind-the-scene things of podcasting listeners never know about.
That everything was set correctly, and they were just checking out the microphone, as Skeptic Zone cats are.
They're doing their job. Now, Susan, a couple of weeks ago on the Skeptic Zone, you gave a very interesting report, and I'm desperately keen for an update. And to refresh our listeners, this was about a certain naturopath called Barbara O'Neill, who has been banned for life from the New South Wales Healthcare Complaints Commission from offering health advice either free or paid. But she is making a big impact on Twitter. Actually, I haven't looked at Twitter, but I know for sure TikTok, where her short videos or short clips, shall I say, of her presentations, various lectures around the world, or probably mostly here in Australia, are being shown. And that was the focus of your report a couple of weeks ago. And in relation to the fact that your team put together her wiki page. So when people look her up after seeing these startlingly bad health advice, the startlingly bad health advice that she gives, people go to wiki to look her up. Can you give us an update on that situation?
Right. So I'm not exactly sure how long it's been since I gave you that audio and I looked that up. I think it's been maybe 10 days, maybe 14 days.
That sounds about right. From recording, from the time of we're recording.
Right. So I had said she was at almost 500,000 views, or I think I said 500,000 views since we wrote the page, but I think I was just kind of rounding up a little bit. And I think it was more like 480,000. So it was almost 500,000. But so as I look at this now on the 25th of June in 2023, she's at 556,544 page views. So that's probably 80,000 views in the last 10 days or so.
Maybe that's all the Skeptic Zone listeners checking it out.
I wouldn't be surprised. But, some people are probably looking her up because of her TikTok videos to see what her credentials are for the odd things that she's promoting, or also they might be thinking she's the next big guru and they should be following her. Or, there's a lot of these doctors and other people who are kind of trying, and the Skeptic Zone and all this Australian skeptics as well, are trying to combat her information. And of course, listeners are probably going, well, who is this again? And they look her up.
Yeah. Yeah, and the videos they range from the just questionable to the extremely bad advice that she's giving. And you're right, there are people, other people who you outlined in your last report, referencing her videos to say, "What, this is crazy. You can't do this. What she's saying is wrong." And it's sad in a way, scary, sad that such bad advice is just being flooded out there on social media.
There's not a lot we can do about it except educating, people around us and advocating for good information. Of course, listening to the Skeptic Zone helps because, as I said before, I would have never heard of her until I started listening to Skeptic Zone and the reports you were coming up with from the Australian skeptics who were reporting on her pretty frantically back in, 2019.
Something like that, yes.
That got my attention, and I asked somebody on my team if they would write the page, and they did in English and in Spanish. The Spanish is also seeing a huge uptick in views. You can see the exact same spike, but getting anywhere as near the amount of views. It's just the same spike visually, but not, I think they're like at 5,000 or 6,000 views.
Okay. So it just goes to illustrate the point you were making in your video that when there is information being put out there, especially on social media or something like that, people are keen to discover more. They'll Google the name. And when they Google somebody's name, what comes up if they have a wiki page is usually the wiki page. They say, oh, here's a wiki page. I'll have a look. And when they go there, they can see the factual, referenced, no two ways about it. Just the straight facts, please, ma'am. Information about people.
Yeah, it's a way of fighting back.
It is a way of fighting back. And you said in your last report how important it was for you to gain new editors to help you out doing this work.
Come get me. We are in bad need of editors. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So friend me on Facebook, send me a private message at the same time. I need your email. I need your Wikipedia username. You will have to go through a pre-training, which takes about 2 hours. After that, you will have seen what the training looks like, and then you can decide if this is something you want to pursue or not. If you decide to pursue it, I will put you in our secret cabal, which is located on Facebook in a private secret group. And then you'll start training it. I do the training. And that takes anywhere from 2 to 4 months.
Okay. Wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be funny if you had somebody out there from the alternative conspiracy world saying, I'm going to infiltrate these people and I'm going to come on and then they start to learn all this stuff and look at the references and go, oh.
Yeah, we haven't had anybody infiltrate us that I know of. And, everybody is coming to skepticism in different angles. We all might have a little bit of a kind of a wooey kind of background and maybe still have some.
Yeah.
I'm not too concerned about that. I'm really not, because I know that the rules of Wikipedia are strong enough that you have to uphold to those rules. So if we did have somebody infiltrate us, I can't imagine why they would want to. That would be they wouldn't find much except us arguing about English spellings versus Australian spellings and come on, all right, come on in and you can hang out with me and sure. Not exciting.
That would be interesting. Now, a couple of weeks before that, or the week before that, I can't remember, but recently you also told us you interviewed, I think it was an interview, a local group in your area, the Monterey area, starting up a local group. And you recently went on an adventure to one of these so-called mystery spots. That's something I've never done. I've never gone to these weird mystery spots. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it was a lot of fun. It was more fun because we were hanging out with like-minded people. It was the Santa Cruz County Skeptics. They're brand spanking new. And then Monterey County Skeptics. They're about 45 minutes away from us. And we said we would go and we would support their group efforts to try to have some hangouts we go over and hanging out with them, and then there'd be more people to meet. And I think that was a lot of fun. But the mystery spot is, oh my gosh, how can I say this? Is
it very mysterious?
No, not really. It was not a tourist trap. I've been there several times, but it wasn't a place where we'd go and heckle anybody or anything like that. It was just a place to go and see something that was interesting. Now, it was something that they could have blamed it being paranormal-ish, like a vortex or something like that. And our guide did talk about vortexes. She also talked about space aliens that created the mystery spot for the benefit of them being able to afford their repairs to their spaceship that crashed on Earth so they can get back to whatever planet they wanted. In other words, she was kind of saying it was a tourist trap. So it's $10 American money. That's not much of anything. And it was a beautiful view. You're climbing up a very steep hill. It was much like when we went to Puzzling World, but maybe only 10 minutes of that. The Puzzling World that Richard and I went together to was in New Zealand a few years ago. Now, that was phenomenal. That was phenomenal. This place was okay. It was all right. It was fun to hang out with friends. We had one member of the group. She's 13. She was there with her father, and she kind of summed it all up. She says, it was underwhelming. But it was fun. But just the conversations, because we were thinking, do people leave this exhibit thinking they've actually seen something magical or a vortex, or do they kind of know it's just an attraction, a building built on the side of a very steep mountain, and that if the building wasn't there, there would be no vortex there. It would just be a hard climb up a very steep climb of a mountain.
Well, really, Susan, the point is to have a nice social occasion with like-minded people, have a fun day out, not anything serious, but it's just good, what shall we say, it's good team bonding and team building and just having a good social day. And I think that just near there anyway, Susan, you met somebody who actually had an encounter with Bigfoot.
Yeah, there's a Bigfoot museum that's in Felton, California, which is right next to Santa Cruz. I have never been there. It was a very tiny space, very enclosed place, and it's been there for years, and I've just never had a chance to go over there. But, we thought the mystery spot, and then maybe we would go over to the Bigfoot museum and then have pizza, which is what we did. And just kind of fills out the day. It was a nice maybe 4 or 5 hours to spend on a Saturday with people. And so we went over to the Bigfoot Museum, and the guy who runs it, his name is Mike Rugg, R-U-G-G. And he kind of reminds me of just this old grandfather figure who's told the same story 1,000 times. And, you could kind of plot what he was going to say. Mark Edwards said he looked a lot like James Randi, reminded him of Randi a lot like a storyteller, this guy with his white beard, and he was sitting behind this counter, and he just got kind of, we all kind of gathered in there, and I'm sure it's hard times trying to keep the place opened. He had maps of sightings. Everything was kind of, tacked up all over the walls. He had the, what is the Patterson Gimlin? Is that what it's called? Film?
Yes. Yeah. The Bigfoot, the famous Bigfoot film. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
I was telling Mark on the drive home, I said, I wonder if this guy has just been doing it for so long that this is just his thing. I don't know if he really believes it, because like you said on your report last week and a few weeks ago, you were saying any day now. I really like that essay, by the way.
Thank you.
That any day now we're going to have UFOs proven. Any day now we're going to find Bigfoot. Any day now.
Yeah.
And I wonder if this man who's been doing this almost 70 years, probably more like 65 years, I wonder if he's kind of like, all right, okay, I'm over it. But this is his life work, and this is how he makes his income, and what is he going to do with his life other than this? So, and it's a nice way of chatting to people.
It's a wonderful part of our culture is storytelling. It's a part of every human culture is storytelling. And if it's fanciful, if it invokes the imagination, that's part of the role of storytelling. And it's, hard to knock that. But here's a short clip, folks. Here's a short little audio clip that Susan made of the man himself telling us a little bit about his encounter.
Okay, let's see. It was in 1950. I was with my parents, my mom and dad. My 2 older brothers were teenagers at that point and didn't want to camp with the parents. So it was just me. And we went up to the Eel River because my dad had a sawmill up in Latelyville, near, which is on the Eel, right at the corner of the Eel where it turns east. So it was the South Fork of the Eel River, and it was real early in the morning. It's about 5:30 in the morning. My dad got us up right at sunup to cook up some breakfast, and I looked and I saw dead fish in the frying pan. And at age 5, I didn't appreciate the idea of eating dead fish for breakfast, so I inquired about pancakes. My dad made really good pancakes, and he just got a little angry, and he said, "No, you're going to have what we're having this morning, and that's fish." So he and my mom went about filleting up, and they were working on cooking the fish. And while they were doing that, I decided to boycott breakfast. So I left. I ran along the edge of the river towards the deeper woods. I must have gone 400 or 500 yards at least, and I couldn't see my parents anymore. And I stopped, and there was a sand barge running out into the river. So I went out on the sandbar, and I was standing there, and I looked across the river, and I looked upstream, and then I looked back towards the woods for a second, and here was this rather large, hairy person standing there looking at me. And so I looked up at him, and we had eye contact for about a count of 3. Then I heard my mother screaming, "Mikey, where are you?" "Oh, Mom's calling." "Well, that's different. I better get back there. I don't want Mom to be upset." So I turned, took one last look at the big guy, and ran towards camp. And not too long down the way, I ran into my parents because they were already starting out to look for me. And I said, "I'm okay. Come and see the big hairy man." So they didn't know what to think, but they were kind enough to follow me. So I went running off, heading back towards the spot where I saw it. And they were right behind me. And when we got there, it wasn't there anymore. It was gone. So they said, "Well, that's okay. Don't worry about it. It was probably a tramp." And I said, "What's a tramp?" And they said, "A tramp is a homeless person. And sometimes they stay out in the woods by themselves a little too long. Their hygiene's not the greatest, and they certainly don't shave every day. So that's probably what you saw." So that day I learned that a tramp is a person 10 feet tall, covered in hair. That's my story, and I'm sticking with it.
It's a great story. Oh, say about his shirt. He had a shirt on.
Yeah, he had a shirt on one arm. I figure that he took it off the clothesline, and then monkey see, monkey do, tried to put it on like we do. Got it up partly up his arm, and couldn't go any further, it was too tight. And so he just left it there. So here he is with this great big hairy man with his shirt hanging off his back.
That adds something to it, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, there you go. And how can we doubt that?
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, Susan, thank you so much. Thank you for the update about the Barbara O'Neill situation. Again, we're keeping a close eye on that. And it's good to know that when people do look up Barbara O'Neill, they get straight to, well, hopefully more or less straight to her wiki page, where there is, and we can't emphasize this enough, it is simply factual referenced information. It's not us or any other group going on there saying, "I'm going to put all this glowing testimonials," or "I'm going to disparage her unnecessarily." No, it's factual reference based.
Yes, absolutely. We have to follow the rules of Wikipedia, and that's what we're doing.
Following the rules of Wikipedia. Susan Gerbic, all the way there in lovely Salinas, California. I hope to catch up with you in the not too distant future so I can go to the war room, sit on your lovely chair and fall asleep.
With a cat or two.
With a cat or two. But for now, Susan Gerbic, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It feels like every family has one.
You can summon aliens with your mind. The only reason why we can't see them is because we're impure and they're pure.
They might be your parents, your siblings, your cousins, and your friends.
Look, she believes that lizard people are walking on the face of the earth.
They might be your teachers, your police officers, and your lawyers.
It's just like, if you disagree with us, there are going to be severe consequences.
They could even be your elected representatives.
Everyone is out to get you. Everyone with the PhD and MD, everyone in the government is out to get you personally.
We watched them storm the Capitol of the United States.
I mean, if I'd have told you on January 5th that any group of people would try to overthrow the U.S. government, you said, no, of course not.
We saw them occupy Ottawa.
Scientific proof that racism doesn't exist. Their sources are always, "Trust me, bro."
But what no one is talking about is how they're destroying relationships.
I don't think people realize how damaging it is to families.
They are QAnon, and these are the stories of the people who love them.
Like, if I play into their fantasies, I can make them believe anything I want.
Look for the Q Dropped podcast on your favorite podcast platform, including YouTube, or go to porthosmedia.net/QDropped.
Hello everyone, this is Adrienne Hill from Skookum Studios in Calgary, Canada, here to read the highlights from the Australian Skeptics Newsletter. This is newsletter number 176. And of course, you can subscribe to this newsletter and get it delivered to your inbox every other week, complete with links to all the stories. Just visit www.skeptics.com.au. But now, let's see what Tim Mendham has for us this week. Hi all, says Tim. Moving one step closer to the big event, tickets are now available for Skepticon 2023, with an early bird discount until the end of July. We look forward to seeing you in Melbourne in December. You can follow us and all that's happening in the skeptical world on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and other platforms. Meanwhile, read on. Tim. Okay, Tim, I'll do just that. Students, stars, and skeptics. Australian skeptics have always had an outreach policy in support of science and accurate, reliable information. Our grants program has been supporting scientific endeavor almost since the start of the group decades ago. So we are happy to announce that we are continuing with our long-standing sponsorship of primary and secondary science students in Australia through the Science Teachers Association of Victoria Talent Search and the Science Teachers Association of New South Wales Young Scientist Awards. Australian skeptics groups in both states have been financial supporters of these activities for many years, alongside other private companies and public institutions. At the same time as these behind-the-scenes support, skeptics have played a role in public discourse on science, pseudoscience, and the paranormal via our media appearances. One ongoing series of interviews is currently carried twice a week by the astronomy-oriented podcast Space Time with Stuart Gary. WHO's promotion of pseudoscience. Quote, "The World Health Organization likes to portray itself as a rational, science-oriented organization. In reality, however, it is a major promoter of dangerous medical treatments," end quote. And this article suggests the organization should have less power and not more. Uh-oh. A Canadian convicted in multi-million-dollar psychic fraud scheme. Sorry about that. There are crooks in every profession, but this 20-year US $170 million psychic scheme takes the cake. Stop the witch hunt against vaccinologist Peter Hotez. Constant abuse against scientists fighting anti-science and pseudomedicine is sadly not uncommon, whether online or face-to-face. This interesting article from a socialist publication concerns one scientist being attacked by the fascist right. It doesn't help that the harassed scientist happens to be Jewish. Scientific fraud rising, and automated systems won't stop it. The peer review system has become badly stretched by ever-rising numbers of submissions, making fraudulent papers harder to spot. And sophisticated AI able to generate plausible scientific data doesn't help. The latest idea among academic publishers is to use automated tools to screen all papers submitted to scientific journals for telltale signs. However, some of these tools are easy to fool. Ideological subversion of biology. This is a look at issues raised when philosophical stances interfere with hard biological sciences, in this case covering genetics, sex, and gender. The UFO needle in the haystack. If you're interested in NASA's recent press conference on its studies into UAPs or UFOs, then this long paper by one of the foremost investigators of the phenomenon is of interest. People prone to apophenia likely to believe conspiracy theories. Quote, "A recent study conducted on undergraduate students in Switzerland found that people who tend to see objects in pictures where there are none, or apophenia, are more likely to believe in COVID-19 conspiracy theories and paranormal phenomena, end quote. Perhaps not surprising that people who see things that aren't there might also tend to believe things that probably aren't there. Update: Skepticon 2023 tickets. Tickets are now available for Skepticon 2023, the 39th Australian Skeptics Annual National Convention. The convention itself will be held on December 2nd through 3rd at the Brain Centre, University of Melbourne, Parkville, with a Friday social event on the evening of December 1st and a dinner on Saturday, December 2nd. At that time of year, unlike in Canada, you won't need to wear your toque to the convention. Tickets cover 1- and 2-day bookings, full price and concession, as well as the dinner itself. There is an early bird discount for the convention until the end of July. Keynote speakers include longtime skeptical activist, Wikipediatrician, and investigator of grief vampires, Susan Gerbic, a favorite with Australian audiences, and Melanie Tresek King, creator of great t-shirts and creator of Thinking is Power, an online resource that provides accessible critical thinking content. Virtual skeptics in the pub. The Bay Area Skeptics in the U.S. hold regular online Skeptics in the Pub events, a casual evening of socializing with fellow skeptics from around our oblate spherical Earth. The June issue of The Skeptic magazine is now out. Digital subscribers will already have received their copies. Hard copies are in the mail. The issue contains an in-depth look at the legal and financial goings-on of the anti-vaccination movement. It also has articles on Eastern versus Western medicine, the truth behind the Illuminati, and lie detectors. And that's 2 separate pieces. Not that the Illuminati would ever lie. The history of racing driver Peter Brock's infamous polarizer, and so much more, including a report on the latest claims of the NDIS founding psychics. You can even read the report by the producer of the Skeptic Zone podcast, Richard Saunders, about an end-of-the-world cult. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time to do so. You can sign up for a hard copy or digital edition, or both. The digital is offered free to those who take up the hard copy version. Contact the editor if you're not sure if your existing subscription needs renewing. Items of interest. Can AI communicate with us telepathically? Hopping on a bandwagon 101. Quote, AI is the ultimate epistemological black box. Who can tell what's going on inside philosophically and whether or when it has gained consciousness? If AI is sentient, it exists at a point of pure information beyond the basic limiting principles of biology, time, and space. End quote. Skynet meets HAL 9000. So-called psychic detective pinpoints the Titanic tourist sub. Quote, it's not where you think, end quote, the story says, and it wasn't where the psychic thought either. Quote, Schneider told the Daily Star he pinpointed a location for Titan roughly 62 miles northeast from the Titanic wreck, end quote. So close. Only 61.75 miles off. Sightless psychic predicts nuclear disaster in 2023. Quote, renowned mystic Baba Vanga, famous for her accurate predictions in the past, has made some chilling forecasts for the year 2023, end quote. Oh dear. Here's a story that doesn't seem to realize that the psychic making up-to-the-minute predictions actually died 30 years ago. Well, that's all for the newsletter, so it's time for the Canadian Word of the Week. Did you hear it in the newsletter? When it gets cold here at home, we have a drawer full of toques to choose from. What is a toque? Well, it is a knit cap, usually with a tapered shape, often with a pom-pom. And it's historically made from wool, but can now be found in a variety of different materials, including synthetics. How do you spell it? Well, there's actually quite a few spellings that I found. I always spell it Touqueus, but Americans would probably prefer to leave out the first U and spell it Toque, and it has also been known to be spelled Tuque. And now I'm going to give you a tricky tongue twister that's all about these very important hats that we have here in Canada to protect our noggins. Timothy's tremendous toque tickled the town's toddlers with its tantalizing tassels and toasty texture. And yes, sometimes toques have tassels that dangle from the ear flaps. And of course, I can't leave you without one more Canadian groaner. Why did the Canadian wear a toque to the beach? Because they wanted to keep their head warm while chilling out. I'm sorry again. Until next time, this is Adrienne Hill signing off.
Hey everyone, this is Brian Dunning from the Skeptoid podcast. I have just completed my new feature documentary film about the real science behind the UFO phenomenon, tantalizingly entitled The UFO Movie They Don't Want You to See. Well, here's your chance to spite them and to see it anyway. If you're going to be at CSIRO 2023 in Las Vegas this October, we're having a free screening. All you need to do is RSVP, and you can do that at skeptoid.com/events. The UFO Movie at CSIRO 2023, skeptoid.com/events.
Time once again to go back to those wonderful pages at Trove at trove.nla.gov.au, of course the online resource from the Australian Government and the National Library of Australia. Yes, governments can do a lot of good sometimes. Full of digitised newspapers going back into Australian history and magazines and all sorts of other things, fully searchable and invaluable as reference material. We've covered many, many topics to do with the paranormal, the supernatural, and I thought I would put into my search criteria this week a couple of words, a few words. Russia, been in the news lately, and the paranormal or the psychic. Now, there's a wonderful video which is on YouTube. If you Google Secrets of the Psychics and the name, of course, James Randi, you will see a documentary made by Nova in the early 90s where James Randi travels to Russia not long after the fall of the Soviet Union, when things were freeing up a little bit, to test various psychics in that country, and that's a fascinating documentary and I recommend it. However, getting back to the newspapers, let's have a look to see what references appeared. And we start with the Newcastle Morning Herald and Miners Advocate, dated the 7th of January, 1903. 1903. Russian court mystery. In reference to the reports in circulation regarding the influence exercised by Monsieur Philippe, I think it's pronounced Philippe, it changes on the newspaper, so I will stick with Philippe. It could be Philip, but we'll stick with Philippe. Exercised by Monsieur Philippe upon the Tsar, advices from St. Petersburg state that the person in question has now left the Russian court in consequence of representations made from more than one quarter, and notably by the court physician Dr. Ott. In Vienna, Neue Freie Presse, says Monsieur Philippe, made his first appearance in the court of the Tsar early in the present year. Of his origin, nothing was known. Some said he was French. Others say he was a native of Montenegro. He was certainly not a Russian. He was presented to the Tsar at the house of the Grand Duke Nicholas Nikolaevich. Felipe, an occultist, a spiritualist, a hypnotizer, a clairvoyant, soon began to play an important role at the court. Nothing was decided without his counsel. He gave advice on all subjects and even matters connected with the domestic life of the Tsar and Tsarina. His particular psychical gifts are stated to have unfavorably affected the Tsarina, and the inexplicable influence of Monsieur Felipe caused much perplexity in court circles. The Tsar, nevertheless, is still enthusiastic and delighted with Felipe's marvelous powers. Another correspondent, writing from Levadia, avers that of late the Tsar has been much occupied with spiritism, having become quite an enthusiastic investigator, and arranges seances at which he is generally alone, although sometimes the Tsarina and Baron Friedrichs are invited. I think that's how it's said. Sometimes the text isn't clear from all those years ago. Felipe is said to have conjured up the spirits of the Tsars Alexander II and III, and also that of unfortunate Tsar Peter III. According to widespread rumour, Felipe is a Finlander, anxious to play a political role in favour of his countrymen. Strange goings-on in Russia all the way back there in 1903. Now, if we travel back the previous year, 1902, on the 29th of November, so not very many months before the previous story, in the Adelaide Observer, Russia, the leading papers in Berlin and Vienna published the startling intelligence that the Tsar of Russia is a believer in modern spiritualism. They aver that Mr. Felipe, and this is spelt different with 3 I's and 2 P's. Anyway, an American spiritualist, that's interesting, exercises a remarkable influence over His Majesty, who arrives at no decision, even in regard to his family affairs, without first consulting him. It is reported that a course of psychic treatment prescribed by Mr. Felipe for the Tsarina has had an unfavourable effect. For some time, Her Majesty has been suffering from melancholia. St. Petersburg telegrams support the statements of Berlin and Vienna newspapers that the Tsar Nicholas is greatly under the influence of Mr. Felipe, an American spiritualist. Correspondents assert that the psychic treatment prescribed for the Tsarina proved injurious, and that the court physician and other influential personages made such strongly adverse representations in reference to the subject that Mr. Felipe on Monday took his departure from the Russian capital. Now let's leap forward many decades to the 1970s, 1974, on the 4th of January in the Canberra Times. And of course, we're coming up to the golden era of psychic claims, in my mind, that being the 1970s. The New Wizardry. Psychic. Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain by Sheila Ostrander and Lynn Schroeder. Abacus. 446 pages, $3. Reviewer Ronald J. Evans. And at the top of the article is a photograph. Hard to determine what it is because of the reproduction here, but it says, Kirlian photo, high-frequency electrical photograph of a fingertip greatly magnified from Psychic, Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain. Psychic, Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain seems like a colourful trip back through time. All the witches and demons are there, dragged up from the murky subconscious. You'll meet some bizarre characters, from old fortune-tellers in Bulgaria to Rasputin-like mediums in Moscow itself. The real message in the book is not clear. There are many confusing side issues ranging from UFOs and telepathy in outer space to studies on reincarnation. But once all the laughter has subsided, you are tempted to think seriously about what you've just read. I have never had any doubts about thought transference. Telepathy can occur between selected individuals, even over quite long distances. A lover feels a strong emotion when his partner is injured. Mothers have nightmares when their children are in mortal danger. Well, if you say so. One mind can tune into another, although the actual medium through which thoughts travel still baffles the boffins. The book suggests a few ways for us to develop our sixth sense for ourselves. Through the authors, we meet Nelia Mikhailova, a PK medium in Leningrad. She can focus her thoughts to move or rotate small objects. You just place a matchbox on the table in front of her. She concentrates very intensely, and behold, the matchbox will actually move, given the right conditions. Some may laugh, but there are films about it. And as an aside, I'll say it's worth noting that James Randi, in I think it was the late 70s or the early 80s, made a little video demonstrating how these matchbox illusions work. We read on. The whole world of levitation reopens for us. The Soviets are experimenting on thought transference between man and animals, and the conditions for willing an idea into someone's head. The next alarming report concerns Kirlian photography. This technique purports to demonstrate an energy field possessed by all living tissues. High-energy electrical fields amplify low-energy phenomena, so that the viewer sees a sort of test pattern of the living world. And what a world to behold! Looking at leaves and fingertips under the machine, one sees an aura of sparkling colours, like fireworks. The authors suggest that this is some form of ghost or halo for the saints. The researchers claim they can predict disease as well in advance. Quite fascinating. Is this how fortune tellers tell your fortune? The style of the book is concise, but not scientific. Well, how about that? The observations are patchy and poorly collated. All the well-used questions about telepathy and ghosts are reviewed with the breadth of Soviet science. The narrative leaves you with an uncanny feeling. Large areas of the mind seem to be awaiting our exploration. Vast powers of thought control, telepathy, and accelerated learning lie dormant. Yet we are still unsure just how to go about the search. The authors of Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain seem to be under a sort of Soviet spell themselves. They give the impression that the Russians are building a scientific bridge back to the mystical religions of the East with all the incumbent superstition. There is something here for everyone. People with a nostalgia for the Cold War will be alarmed by the suggestion that the Russians are working on thought machines for use against the West. Oh, those Russians. Again, it's so interesting to look back through the pages of Trove to see how our society once viewed these things like Kirlian photography and moving matchboxes and things like that, when the phenomena was more or less new, and apart from, well, the matchbox tricks, which magicians knew, people were very unsure as to what was going on with things like Kirlian photography. And of course, Kirlian photography, as in what it claims to do, was debunked decades and decades ago. Adventures in Russia, and once again I point you to the documentary Secrets of the Psychics with James Randi. In fact, I will link to that documentary in this week's show notes because it's certainly worth your time to view that. And finally, to end off this trove, something completely unrelated to the subject of Russia. I stumbled across this little snippet dated the 21st of June 1987 in the Canberra Times, in a column called By the Way. There is mischief in the wording of an obituary in the new edition of the Canberra Skeptic, Journal of the ACT branch of Australian Skeptics, an organisation whose members devote themselves to mocking assertions about paranormal powers. Quote, "The psychic community was shocked to learn," end quote, the obituary says, quote, "of the death of British clairvoyant and medium Doris Stokes, who died unexpectedly on May 9, 1987, end quote. Next week, I might put in another random country into the Trove archives and do a search, because when you do that, when you search through Trove, you never know what you might find. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast, and thank you to those people who have contacted me pointing out the logical fallacies in the segment we ran at the end of last week's show. This was the author Ross Coulthard. I think that's pronounced. Sorry, Ross, no disrespect if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly at all. And let me replay what he said, and again, listen out for the logical fallacies.
An enormous amount that Mr. Grush knows. And I know, it's really funny. One thing that I want to emphasize is it's 2 weeks now. 2 weeks. We've had all the carping debunkers and all the skeptics. Not one of them has laid a glove on the credibility of Mr. Grush. And all he wants is the opportunity to have his allegations tested. What are they frightened of? He's called their bluff. If he's lying...
Now, correspondent Michael Goff has mentioned poisoning the well in that. Last week I mentioned trying to disprove a negative. We could say that the burden of proof lies with those making the claims. The burden of proof is not up to the skeptics to prove the UFOs are not coming. And I would add begging the question, where he says, what are they frightened of? It's nonsensical. What are we frightened of? And he says, he's called their bluff. What bluff? What are you talking about? What? It's comical. It's comical that someone who bills themselves as a professional journalist would stoop to such cartoon arguments. He's called their bluff. Yes, well, I admit it. You've got me. I've just been bluffing all the time. I haven't got 3 aces at all. Anyway, we wait. We wait for those making the claims to produce the evidence. And I'll say it again. I know it really doesn't need saying, but I'll say it again. Skeptics are not afraid or scared of the possibility of aliens being here or coming. Or maybe we are. Depends on what they're going to do. But generally speaking, no, we're not afraid. And again, this bluffing idea, if aliens are here, so be it. And what else did he say? Carping? Thank you to those wonderful non-carping people who support the Skeptic Zone at PayPal or Patreon every week by your little contributions, micropays, etc. And you can do that at skepticzone.tv. And needless to say, there would be no bluffing, no carping, no being afraid without your very generous contributions to the show. And if you haven't contributed to the show, if you enjoy it every week, then I would ask you to at least consider. It certainly helps keep the show going. Coming up on next week's show, I'm going to read a report from the Skeptic magazine, the Journal from Australian Skeptics, about an investigation I did with the help of some carping skeptical friends into the premium wine card. Now, some of you may remember reading about this in the magazine. This was a card marketed some years ago. It's about the same size as a credit card, and the idea is if you pour yourself a glass of mediocre wine and you rub this card on the glass, it changes the taste of the wine into a better wine. Maybe that's the alien technology we've been promised now for decades. I think the aliens do enjoy a drop or two. They're quite partial to a Shiraz, I think. Maybe that's why they crash. Maybe that's why there's so many crashed UFOs, flying saucers. Yeah, they fly over Sydney, drop in on the Hunter Valley, just north of Sydney, sample a nice glass or two, get back into their spaceships, and boom. Maybe Mick West can offer some insights into that. Anyway, for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter @Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian Skeptics or any other skeptical organisation.
The Bear Area. The Bay Area skeptics in the U.S. hold regular online Skeptics in the Pub. Why can't I say the sentence?